Design for Freedom was launched here in 2020 at Grace Farms in Connecticut, which is a new kind of public place embedded in nature to tackle humanitarian issues. Essentially, we're a generative platform where the public, private, and government sectors come together. This is Sana's design, which breaks down barriers between people and sectors in a hopeful, transparent place. And we aim to create more grace and peace in our world locally and globally, and our stake in the ground is to end modern-day slavery and gender-based violence. And in fact, today we are hosting and partnering with the UN Population Fund to address violence against women and girls in the virtual realm. We have about 500 that are both virtually here and on site. So this is actually where our advocacy to end slavery met our investment in architecture and surfaced one of the most significant ethical questions of our time in late 2017. We recognize there's a void in the design and construction sector. Essentially, this construction industry is getting a fair labor material transparency pass. All buildings, including Grace Farms around the globe, are built with materials that have a high risk of forced and child labor. Not one modern building can be certified without forced labor in its thousands of materials. In fact, rarely a few of those materials. So we initialized a new movement, Design for Freedom, to create a radical paradigm shift, to create institutional responses, and then also illuminate, then remove forced labor from our building materials supply chain. So today I'm asking you to add human rights as a fundamental criterion in building material specifications and procurement, and to envision your buildings being built without forced labor, without embedded suffering in your foundations, curtain walls, and interiors. So I encourage you during this session to think, for all of you who are shaping the built environment, to think about this issue from your vantage points and what we can all do together to move towards a more humane built environment. The built environment does have an inextricable relationship with nature and people. I'd like to start with a question that has brought leaders around the table to answer. Is your building ethically sourced, forced labor free, as well as sustainably designed? The answer is we don't know. And to complete the full picture of the life cycle of building materials, we are considering embodied labor or embodied suffering alongside when we're examining embodied carbon. So forced labor is subsidizing right now the opaque and complex global building material supply chain, yet the issue remains remarkably unrecognized worldwide. There's this startling blind spot in terms of the brutality forced upon workers who are critical to the production of the very materials we're sourcing, even with a sustainable lens. So their suffering should not be built in to our construction. More specifically, we're talking about addressing on-site labor. This is material procurement, but we are addressing only half of the issue when we only talk about on-site labor. So the examination for this session is on material procurement. And then we're going to also now take a bird's eye view. We're on the cusp of architecture justice and environmental breakthroughs. So you're already investigating the structural performance, the environmental impacts, low embedded carbon. So now we need to expand the definition of sustainability to ethical, social sustainability. Now, the built environment is the largest single contributor to climate change and is also the largest industrialized sector at the highest risk of forced labor. So while we are starting to inspect our building supply for this embodied carbon, we're inspecting now, again, for embodied suffering. For those, again, excuse me, hold on. let's see. Because we think about the way, we're in terms of material procurement, it includes harvesting, mining, refining, processing, transporting, and manufacturing our building materials before they arrive on site. So you think about how we're looking at those materials beyond the perimeter of the job site. And nearly 28 million people around the world are in forced labor conditions, working in hazardous and inhumane environments. Millions are making and extracting those building materials that we'll be talking about more specifically. So now achieving ethical supply chains will require mobilizing the full ecosystem of the built environment, which we've begun. So over the past, so since it began really, about 5 years ago, we've been putting together. Now we have about 80 leaders in the full ecosystem in each one of these areas. So we need architects, engineers, construction managers, to media, education, research with universities, and manufacturers. But certainly we also want to stimulate buyer demand from the public as well. And you can understand these are in the blue, there are those points of influence that you can use to either mandate, let's say in the owner project requirements, which we've already seen start to happen. And I'll show you the toolkit that you can use to start to implement some of these strategies. Now, Design for Freedom Working Group I mentioned has been really working together with leaders of industry, their CEOs, principals, industry experts, because we need to be able to make quick decisions. The level of urgency is actually very apparent. You can see Material Bank here as part of the working group. Thank you, Rebecca, for putting us together, as well as Borough Happold, Yale University, and then you can see the number of an expanse of some of the institutions that we're working with. Now, there are actually global laws. What differentiates this movement from the green building movement per se is that global laws forbid the use of slave labor in the built environment. Yet our buildings and materials that go into our buildings are heavily reliant on slave labor. You can see too that the countries are moving to make corporations more accountable with modern day slavery acts. And the one thing to note is that the US has two trade laws that do have teeth: the Trade Facilitation and Enforcement Act that prohibits all goods made with forced labor from entry into the United States, and also the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act that just went into effect in June. Right now, there are between 1,000 and 2,000 cargo shipments that are being held up at the border, and many of those do include solar panels, right? So these are starting to become effective ways for enforcement of what are global laws. There's also illegally logged timber laws, the Lacey Act. So it really is important for us to not only examine our supply chain and understand the provenance thereof, but also whether it's fair labor inputs. So now, are owners subsidizing our ROIs with slavery? Another way to think about it is that, are we accepting the slavery discount? The answer is likely yes, because people ask quite often, now if I start to examine my supply chain for fair labor, is it going to cost more? You can think of it more like this, that there's a differential, a delta right now between what includes fair market produced materials and not, and we need to determine what that is. And that's part of what we're going to be working on as industry experts to determine. So what are the riskiest products? Well, there was no list of materials at the beginning, so we researched and developed a list of 12 raw and composite materials that are at risk, that have long-standing histories of human rights violations, and that have been right in front of us. Former ambassador to monitor and combat human trafficking in persons, Lou DeBacca, was part of our team and helped to actually put this together. At the beginning, we published a report that you can find online at designforfreedom.org That does include the establishing the beginnings of the movement and this list of materials that we started off with. And then you can see too that among these materials they're all pretty ubiquitous, the ones that we are using, including steel, glass, minerals, bricks, stone, copper, and textiles. And timber, for example, is one of the most fraught and most used materials. The U.S. International Trade Commission does note that 38% of wood products globally are used for construction. So we issued a Design for Freedom toolkit back in March at our first Design for Freedom Summit here at Grace Farms. We had about 300, including the former UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, Prince Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein. And he said at the time that this is how all good revolutions start. And also, thinking about the construction sector as a whole is something that he would have even delved more into when he was had his term between 2014 and 2018. So this toolkit is something that the industry has started to use starting back in March. It's a comprehensive resource that goes deeper into those materials. You can see that the education and elements are at the beginning. We also have letters for commitments, principles and overview. Thank you. And have a way to implement it through questionnaires, sample specifications, and a tracking system. So now, part of the what's really exciting is that we can now start to look at the correlation between the relevant certifications that do include fair labor inputs in terms of timber. Timber advances, there's been advancements in timber-derived building material technologies that include engineered wood and mass timber products are proliferating across the globe due to their potential to substitute higher carbon footprint building materials like concrete, steel, and aluminum. And yet, all 4 of these materials are fraught. So the most hazardous working conditions are often in remote regions without oversight at the extraction level, where forced and illegal labor proliferates. So these advancements, obviously cannot be upheld with forced labor to start to create these sustainable solutions. Raw material suppliers are expected to be at a higher risk of both exploitation in the environment and with laborers to provide these climate solutions, particularly given the urgency to produce at higher volumes, right, as the prices increase and shortfalls intensify, all without supply chain transparency requirements globally. So you can see we put in the toolkit nations that are producing timber at high risk of forced labor where there's evidence thereof. Also, it's good to note that timber laws not only exist in the United States with the Lacey Act, but also in Australia, EU, Swiss, UK timber regulations. So it's important also, you can see in terms of abiding and having compliance with international laws. We also identify at-risk timber sawn wood, let's say. So you can see this in this case is Brazil and Peru, Russia, which is obviously a big issue right now in terms of sourcing anything from Russia. The percentage of global consumption and production also provides a way to triangulate where there are hotspots. Textiles. This is extremely important because, like I noted, there's already been an earlier examination and accountability in terms of the garment industry. We're looking to convert that. You can see here it has the most relevant certifications that include fair labor auditing, third-party auditing. And these are going to be very relevant and useful as we start to look to adopt this and create more transparency in the interior textiles industry. We want to adopt these textile sourcing requirements. And here are some of those hotspots again. We identify where there's child and forced labor separately. And also even note where there might be the Customs Border Protection withholding release orders too, where they ban some of the relevant building materials like cotton. Now, glass is interesting because its recycling is very powerful, but it's vastly underused decarbonization tool for glass, particularly in the building sector. The future use of flat glass in buildings is expected to grow, both from renovation and new construction. Yet there are no current certifications that include fair labor assessments specifically for glass. And you can see too that that's an important part of it. You can see too why, what are the components of glass? We'll put that into our exhibit so people understand even these composites where the products end up being used. Copper itself is used in many applications for sustainable solutions, including solar panels. So the polysilicon is one of the most direct monolithic supply chains to China and the Uyghur region. About 50% is of the whole global supply of polysilicon is in the Uyghur region. Copper is also part of those solutions. The sustainable offerings. So now the upcoming demand of copper is going to put mining projects probably very close to climate sensitive locations. And 65% of the undeveloped copper reserves and resources are located in close proximity to biodiversity conservation areas. You can see again how climate change, all the work that we're doing for sustainability and environmental solutions need to be now very closely related to how we're examining the ethical and equity issues. 47% are in close proximity to indigenous peoples' lands. However, like what Burra Happel's doing, there's others that are starting to produce these certifications. The Copper Mark is one of them. There are currently 30 mines that are recipients of the Copper Mark, yet none of those are in the hotspot countries that have those certifications. So I'll show you right there. Now, Mexico has actually submitted letters of commitment for these 3 different mines. So again, it's important to take a look at that. This is again with concrete, so I'm gonna go a little faster on that. Steel and iron are also, does have sustainable properties. At the same time, it is not monolithic. You can think about, these are all the components. And as you go through the extraction, smelting, casting, and rolling that are in hazardous conditions and do circulate the globe. So here are those hotspots. Again, you'll see more depth in the toolkit. And it's also important to think about moving from the linear to a circular material flow, because that also is important in terms of truncating at the supply chain at the extraction level, where it is at the highest risk of forced and child labor. So relevant certifications are in the toolkit. Labels and standards. I want to thank you, Material Bank. Design for Freedom is working with many of the certification bodies, transparency labels, and material databases to create this next level of social equity transparency. So specifically, we're working together with organizations like Material Bank, Mindful Materials, creating this common material framework that was incorporating Design for Freedom. Filters, Building Ease, HPD Collaborative, USGBC, and ToxNot are incorporating a fair labor and equity lens to material disclosures, ingredient reporting, and sourcing information. So this is needed. There's too many materials. We need to have these aggregators to be able to enable and make this even a less onerous, but very doable transparency work that we need to be doing. So the additional resources are in there. We have that supplier outreach letter, questionnaire. This is exciting. The ethical design requirements. We worked with Gensler and a team of our sub-team of the working group to put this together. and we're working on the next version of these. So you'll see that it's right online. Same with the material tracking schedule. It is a simple way to just start. Everybody can start today on any project. First, in asking for where materials are sourced from your suppliers. That's why supplier letters are excellent, because you're not doing this alone. But also because you can start to think about how to do this, how to put this into your own system. WSP is working with us to create the next level, and many others too. And then again, the last thing is we want to show that this is actually putting into play this toolkit, how we're actualizing what we're advocating for. So these Design for Freedom pilot projects are accelerating awareness. They're initializing these transparency among big teams. That's what's super exciting, because there's a cascading effect in construction, unlike, I think, other industries. And we're starting to increase the body of knowledge, even to understand where are these materials being sourced from, the ethical provenance thereof. So these pilot projects are located in the US, England, and India right now. We will be announcing a new set of Design for Freedom pilot projects that we work with, and that will happen at the beginning of the year. So if you on this call and in this session, and you have the possibility of doing so, reach out to us, Nora Rizzo. Black Chapel. This is a very relevant project in terms of being able to create awareness, of course, but also putting out data. So we have a brief, that just a very simple one you can find online too, that shows the products that were examined, how we trace them, and where they're sourced. You can see those are not hotspots per se, and what certifications were used. New Canaan Library, right here where we are. Turner Construction was on this project along with Centerbrook. But what's been so, I think, illuminating is that you bring in folks that are like-minded, that are innovators, that want to then be able to use our wherewithal, right? So Turner Construction has now done so more broadly within their entire organization, part of their ESG Summit. Shadow of a Face by Nina Cook-John. She's replacing the city of Newark's Columbus Monument with the Harriet Tubman Monument. And she's now also we've announced that she is also designing our specific Design for Freedom exhibit here at Grace Farms as well. She's extraordinary. We also opened with Allison Schatz, and we're able to work with the North American Stainless Steel, who've never been asked about whether or not their materials are made with fair labor. And this is, you'll be able to see this online too. Serendipity Arts in New Delhi it's one of the largest new projects there by one of the top industrialists, Sunil Manjal. And again, lastly, this is a call to action to construction, interiors, and landscape. We're using the same materials, and really everyone can just ask where are materials coming from. If they're made with fair labor, put those into your material libraries. And then want to acknowledge that we are harnessing all this from the industry that we can in short order to advance a non-negotiable challenge that every building should be designed and built without forced labor for freedom. So once you know, you can't unknow it. And now there is a duty to act. I think for the next one, for Burrow Haffold, for Gabe, who designed the Grace Farms lighting, which is how all these things come together, and be able to share his new emerging, not only embodied suffering calculator toolkit with Kaylee as well, and others, including Phil Bernstein, who had, again, was able to put into place the first class on building materials. So you can see how this all goes together and how everyone's using their wherewithal. So this is really fantastic. Thank you so much.